Chapter 5. A World Apart. Part 2. Lucas sat on the cold metal bench, his knees pulled up to his chest, listening to the low hum of machinery in the walls. The familiar scent of disinfectant clung to the air, sharp and sterile. The laboratory had always been like this, bright, clinical, and precise. It was a place where time moved in measured intervals, where he was weighed, studied, and written about, but never really seen. Today was different. The usual flurry of movement was absent, and the quiet felt strange, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He sat perfectly still, straining to hear the muffled voices of the researchers beyond the door. Budget cuts, program shutdown. Too expensive to keep them all. Nothing significant has happened in 4 years. The words hit Lucas like a slap, making his chest ache in a way that felt unfamiliar, as if his heart had folded in on itself. Nothing significant. His fingers curled into fists, nails pressing into his palms. The message was clear. He was irrelevant. Unremarkable. A burden too costly to maintain. But something inside him resisted. I am not nothing. He sat frozen in that moment, his thoughts swirling in chaotic loops. The idea of leaving the facility was incomprehensible. The sterile walls had been his world, both his prison and his shelter. Out there, beyond the doors, was a world he knew only from books and overheard conversations. It was supposed to be vibrant, but to Lucas it was a void, a place where no one would measure his progress, where no one would care if he vanished altogether. And yet, beneath the fear, something stirred, a flicker of possibility. What if freedom could mean more than survival? The thought terrified him as much as it thrilled him. The day came sooner than he expected. A nurse handed him a bundle of clothes that didn't fit properly. An oversized sweater and shoes half a size too small. They gave him no instructions, no goodbyes. Just a set of unfamiliar clothes and a brief directive. Out! He stood at the doorway, the only sound in the hallway, the dull hum of lights overhead. The metal door hissed open, releasing a gust of cool air that smelled of rain and pine. Lucas blinked against the sudden brightness as daylight spilled into the corridor. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the storm of emotions inside him. Excitement, fear, anger, hope. His hands trembled as he hesitated at the threshold, toes balanced between the cold floor of the only home he'd ever known and the warm world beyond. For a moment, he glanced back at the walls, the machines, the sterile comfort that had housed his nightmares and fleeting kindnesses. It wasn't just a building, it was everything he had known. Routine, captivity, and survival. Leaving felt like tearing away a part of himself, and the absence stung. But there was no going back. He stepped forward, crossing the threshold, and the sunlight hit his face fully. The brightness was overwhelming, filling his eyes with warm golden light that blurred the edges of the world. He inhaled sharply as the scent of wet leaves and damp earth washed over him, more vivid than anything he had ever imagined. His shoes sank slightly into the soft grass beneath his feet, a strange sensation that made him pause. He crouched down, pressing his hands into the earth, feeling the texture of the soil against his skin. It was cool, alive, and real, in a way that nothing in the lab had ever been. The vastness of it all hit him at once. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, clouds drifting like lazy giants across the blue expanse. The breeze played with his hair, tugging at the hem of his sweater. For the first time in his life, the world felt boundless, and it made his heart ache with both fear and longing. A distant rumble of thunder echoed from the horizon. Lucas looked up, squinting into the sky, where dark clouds gathered at the edge of the world. A breeze picked up, cool and restless, stirring the grass around him. There was something strange in the air, a charge, like the brief moment before lightning strikes. For a fleeting second, Lucas wondered if the storm was waiting for him, if it had always been waiting, just beyond the walls. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands, a final glance back at the laboratory behind him, and then he whispered the words quietly, as if to convince himself, "I will find my way." The next chapter of his life began with a foster family that received him with cold indifference. They provided the basics, a small room, food, and a roof over his head, but emotional warmth was absent. They moved through their lives like shadows, acknowledging his presence only when necessary. Lucas was grateful for the necessities, but craved connection in a way that felt forever out of reach. He learned the rhythm of their home quickly. The quiet breakfasts where he served himself from the leftovers, the evenings spent alone in his room while they watched television in the other room. They didn't ask him about his day or try to engage with him. At least there were no needles, no tests, no cold glances from doctors waiting for results. He could come and go as he pleased, a welcome freedom after the confines of the lab, but one that only deepened his isolation. In the laboratory, his time outside had been limited to carefully monitored excursions, brief moments of respite from the cold, clinical atmosphere. Now he could wander freely, but the freedom felt hollow without someone to share it with. At night, Lucas would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what he was supposed to do now. His mind drifted back to the cold walls of the Medi-laboratory, replaying the tests and the silence that followed him like a shadow. Nothing significant, they'd said. He could still hear those words sometimes, buzzing faintly in his mind, like a mosquito he couldn't swat away. What am I supposed to be now that I'm free? There were moments when he almost missed the predictability of the lab. At least there, his life had a defined shape, even if it was a small one. Out here, life was too big and formless, and Lucas felt like he was swimming through it without knowing which way to go. But there were small mercies. He loved the nights when it rained. The sound of water hitting the roof soothed him, like a distant memory of something important, something he hadn't quite grasped yet. On those nights, Lucas would sneak out into the backyard, letting the cold rain soak through his clothes. It made him feel alive in ways nothing else could. The storm in the sky seemed to echo the one inside him, restless and endless. The foster parents never asked where he went or why his clothes were damp when he returned. And Lucas never told them. Some things, he decided, were better left unspoken. This part of his life wasn't much, but it was enough to sustain him, for now. With every passing day, Lucas learned to live in the spaces between people's attention, in the cracks of a world that didn't notice him. It was a lonely existence, but it was his. And somehow that felt like a small victory.